All right, let's get right into it. Today we're going to unpack a huge story from the tech world that, on the surface, looks like a pretty simple corporate power move, but trust me, the real story is so much more fascinating and honestly a lot weirder.
So, bam, this was the headline that just dropped, and it sent shockwaves everywhere. Alan Dye, a top design guy at Apple, is leaving to go to Meta. The story was framed as this massive, public win for Zuckerberg's company and, a huge loss for Apple. A classic poaching story, right?
But, and this is a big but, here's where things get interesting. Was this really the major coup that everyone thought it was? What if I told you the public story and what was happening inside Apple's walls were polar opposites?
Yeah, so far from being some kind of crisis, sources inside Apple say the mood was celebratory. In fact, some people are apparently calling Dye's departure the absolute best personnel news the company has had in decades. That is a wild disconnect from the headlines. So that just begs the question, doesn't it? If one of your top executives gets snapped up by a huge rival and your own employees are thrilled about it, what is actually going on here? Let's peel back the layers on this one.
To really get why so many folks at Apple were basically popping champagne, we have to look back at the last 10 years under Alan Dye's leadership. It was an era that many people, both inside and outside the company, saw as a real departure from what made Apple, well, Apple.
The list of criticisms against the Dye era was pretty long. The main complaint was this shift from function to just form, prioritizing how things looked over how they actually worked. This led to software that felt less usable, with some calling things like macOS Tahoe a total mess. And the result of all this? A serious brain drain. Dozens of top-tier designers just got fed up and left, feeling like the company had lost its way.
And this right here, this is the heart of the whole conflict. It's Steve Jobs' famous line. The critics felt that under Dye, the design team had almost completely forgotten the second, and arguably the most crucial part of that sentence. They were nailing the what it looks like part, but how it works was getting worse and worse.
And check this out. The contrast between Dye and the guy who's replacing him couldn't be more stark. It's night and day. Alan Dye came from fashion and branding. Think Kate Spade. His whole world was aesthetics. His replacement, Stephen LeMay, is a career interface designer, a guy who has spent his entire life in the trenches, sweating the details of how it works.
Okay, so this brings us to the central puzzle. Apple replaced the looks guy with the works guy. That seems like a huge, deliberate change in strategy, right? Well, there's a pretty big problem with that theory.
Here's the part that just doesn't add up. If Apple's top brass was happy with Dye's direction, why on earth would they pick his philosophical opposite to replace him? But on the flip side, if they knew they needed this massive change, why did they wait for him to leave? Why wasn't he pushed out years ago? It just doesn't make logical sense.
So this contradiction is the key. All the reporting says Dye chose to leave. He wasn't fired. But his replacement, Stephen LeMay, signals a complete 180-degree turn in philosophy. Those two facts seem to fight each other, which means there has to be another explanation.
And that explanation is pretty wild. The theory is that this huge, positive change in direction wasn't some strategic master plan. Not at all. It might have been a complete accident, born out of panic and a desperate need for stability. Okay, so let's walk through how this might have gone down. Step 1. Dye's decision to leave for Meta completely blindsides Apple's leadership. Step 2. Panic. They start worrying that Meta is now going to poach Dye's entire inner circle. Step 3. They got to act fast to stop the bleeding, and they need someone loyal, someone they can trust. Step 4. They promote Stephen LeMay, not because he's some new visionary, but because he's a politically safe choice who isn't part of Dye's crew and probably won't get poached himself.
And that brings us to this perfect word, happenstance. The whole idea is that Apple may have just stumbled backwards into this incredibly positive new direction purely by chance. An accidental revolution in design, driven not by vision, but by a crisis.
So, all right, why does any of this corporate drama matter to you, the person actually using an iPhone or a Mac every day? Well, turns out this accident could have a huge real-world impact on the tech you use.
The future under LeMay looks really, really optimistic. Insiders are expecting a full-on return to Apple's roots, focusing on usability, on craftsmanship. At the very least, his promotion should stop the drain of all that frustrated talent. But the real hope? Tangible, measurable improvements to the software you use, all driven by a deep understanding of design that critics say has been missing for a long time.
Let that just sink in for a second. The feeling is that this happenstance, this total accident,
could be the single most important positive thing to happen to Apple's user interface design in over a decade. A massive turning point for the company that they just stumbled into.
And that's really the thought I want to leave you with. It's just a fascinating look at how chaos and pure chance can sometimes lead to incredible things. Is it really possible that the next great chapter for one of the world's most important companies was just kicked off, not by some grand plan, but by a complete and total accident? We're going to have to watch and see. Thanks for tuning in.